This is probably going to be controversial, but we're just going to get into it. Hello Starlets, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Today I wanted to touch on a topic that I think is going to be a little controversial, but I just felt like I needed to talk about it. I've been talking a lot more about masculine and feminine energies and dynamics on my channel, and I've also made reference, I haven't talked about it a lot on my channel, but I've made reference to it a bit on Instagram about the topic of narcissism. In a way, it doesn't get addressed enough, and in a way, it gets addressed too much. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I just feel like it's an important topic. And in my studies of masculine and feminine dynamics, and even in like sort of like the inner work spirituality space, I feel like it's a topic that it doesn't get touched on enough. I just really wanted to touch on it. Before I do, because I do know that this is a controversial topic for a lot of people, I want to do, there's gonna be a lot of disclaimers. I'm just gonna put it out there, right? First of all, I'm not like a licensed therapist or anything. So nothing that I say is actually a substitute for actually talking to a mental health professional. I'm literally just gonna talk about experiences from my own life of things that I've observed, and also I've done a lot of research from people who have studied this topic much more in depth. Not that that's a substitute obviously for getting some kind of a PhD in it or anything, but I've done my research. I'm not just blindly talking about this topic. I also want to state that I know that the term narcissist is, or narcissism is getting thrown around a lot lately. So I want to make it very clear, when I talk about narcissism, I'm not talking about somebody who's vain, or somebody who takes a lot of selfies, or just somebody who ghosts you, or, you know, like I don't buy into that whole like, oh, he didn't call when he said he would, or like, oh, he was late for dinner, oh, he's a narcissist. Like I'm not buying into that, right? I actually think that kind of talk and that kind of thinking, and like really throwing that word around really freely, I actually think it hurts people who are actually have been subjected to actual psychological abuse, and I don't think it's helpful to them. So that's not at all what I'm talking about. When I talk about narcissism, I'm speaking specifically of narcissistic personality disorder. In my research, has actually been a lot of discrepancy over whether it's something you can diagnose because it's a mental illness, or if it's personality type, or things like that. That's for people to debate who have way more education than I do on the topic. But I do know that there is, and I'm going to try to find a link to it, and I will leave it below. It's a list of traits and characteristics that a person with narcissistic personality disorder will have, and if you read through that list, if they have a certain percentage of those things listed, then it's likely that you're dealing with somebody with narcissistic personality disorder. I also want to state that I'm going to be referring to narcissists of the male gender. Statistically speaking, some of you may not want to hear this, but statistically speaking, there are more men that exhibit narcissistic personality disorder than there are women. Now, I didn't do the research, so don't shoot the messenger. This is information. I've read this in many, many places. Now, I think there's a lot of reasons that people believe that it's true that there are more male narcissists than there are female. Some people believe that it's just like a socially cultural thing. It could change over time, and that does not at all mean that women can't be narcissist or have narcissistic personality disorder. It doesn't mean that if you are somebody watching, male or female, that you haven't dealt with a female who has had this. I personally, my own experience has been with people with narcissistic personality disorder who were males. So that's the perspective I'm going to be taking in this video. Now, I also want to say that I do not believe that just because someone is a man, that means that they're narcissist. I also don't believe that masculinity, like true healthy masculinity, which I have a lot of videos where I talk about healthy masculinity, I don't believe that healthy masculinity is narcissistic by any means. I think that there are some wounded, toxic, unhealed, whatever you want to call it, masculinity traits that contribute to narcissistic personality disorder, but actually, like, being a man and being in your masculine does not automatically make you a narcissist, and I'm not saying that at all. So a little bit about my own personal experience with narcissistic personality disorder, which is something that I'm unpacking a little bit more every day. So I've experienced a lot of it in my life, and I think one of the reasons partly for that is similar to the idea of, you know, I mean, it's so common, it's almost cliche. If somebody has like an alcoholic parent, they may throughout their life end up continuously connecting with people in their life that all are alcoholics or some form of addiction, because that's their comfort zone, that's what they know. And so for me, it was narcissist. It was what I knew, and I didn't know that was what I knew. If that makes any sense. So I first started doing research on this because of a past relationship that had left me confused. That was probably the only word I could use. I was completely confused. And I started doing some research, and it kind of led me down the path to studying this, and it really opened up my eyes to a lot of patterns, a lot of things that I saw in this relationship that I related to other relationships, and I started noticing my pattern of getting involved with people who were very psychologically abusive. The pattern goes deep. It goes really far back. The first time I read the criteria for what it means, what the traits are that you would see in someone with narcissistic personality disorder, I scanned the list, and the majority of the men that I've come in contact with in my life fit every criteria. And to the point where when I read the list, and it's gonna sound horrible, but I'm just gonna say it because this is really what I believed at the time, I thought that these traits that defined a narcissist were just the defining traits of a man. Like, I thought this was just how men were. And the reason why I thought that was because that's all I had experienced. And because I'd actually had several men in my life who, when I would call them out on some of these traits, would then tell me, well, this is just how men are. If you're gonna date men, this is just how it is, right? So I was told this. So this was a story, and I actually have mentioned this in a few of my other videos. You know, we get these limiting beliefs, we get these ideas in our head that aren't our own, but there's an idea that somebody else puts on us. And I just believed that because that's what I was told. And I had no reason at that point to not believe it. So yeah, so that was just my experience, is that just men were, I didn't have a term for narcissism at the time, but that these characteristics were just how men were. So when I would get into a relationship with a guy who exhibited any of these qualities, I would just think, well, if I'm gonna be in a relationship, this is just what I have to put up with. And that's the way that I lived my life for so many years. Probably one of the reasons why I haven't been in a huge number of relationships over the course of my life, because this is what I've been dealing with, and they were usually so draining on me. And I actually remember, it was a little over a year ago, I did my first women's group coaching program. I was in a group of women, and the woman leading the group was actually talking about healthy masculinity. It was one of my first time studying healthy masculinity, or masculine feminine energies. And she was talking about healthy masculinity, about, you know, like being grounded, being present, being very, being a provider and a protector, and all of these things. And I was hearing that, I was like, oh my God, like, where do I sign up? Like, where are these men? Are they on back order? Like, what's the deal? Like, I had no clue that there were men like this out there. But then I started looking around, and I started looking around at my life and my past, and I said, wow, I don't know anyone like this. I don't actually, that's not in my vision, that's not in my life, right? And I just, oh, it made me so sad to think that I had spent my life, my neighbor's gonna use this leaf blower now. Fabulous. Okay, narcissist. No, I'm kidding. So there I was at this point where I was like, yes, I want a healthy masculine man in my life, but I didn't really even believe it existed. To me, it was like it was a unicorn. Like, there was no way that it was possible that that was a thing. And I was just so, I mean, then I had to go through that wave of depression, and you go through a whole lot of waves of this kind of stuff, especially when you're healing, particularly when you're healing from psychological abuse, because that is so ingrained in your psyche, and you then have to, I mean, it's basically like you're spending your life having to fight through limiting beliefs that people have just shoved in your head that are not true in a lot of cases. But yeah, it's been a lot of unpacking. So one of the things is, I find it really odd that more people in the inner work, spiritual space don't really talk about narcissism very much. And I feel like when they do sometimes, I get a little bit weird about how they address it. A lot of times, I feel like there's kind of a push of saying, like, well, all your relationships are just mirroring back to you what you need to see in yourself, or mirroring back to you what you're giving and stuff like that. So like if you are, I've heard this before and this was really triggering, if you're involved with a narcissist, then you must be a narcissist. And that I feel like is really dangerous. Not that it is never true, it can be true. And I do know that there's a lot of situations where I've been in relationships with people who were narcissists, who I did learn and grow from. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna say that I never had any personal growth experiences by seeing what they were doing and being like, ooh, okay, yeah, maybe I see a little bit of myself in that and I don't want to do that. I do also think it's dangerous though, because part of the concept of being psychologically abused by somebody who's a narcissist is the blame always goes on you and you become the bad guy. Like you become the scapegoat, you become the bad one. That being ingrained in you, that's a hurdle when it comes to then when you're trying to do like spiritual growth and inner work, and then like you're always blaming yourself, and then to have somebody come in and say, okay, it's a mirror, it's what you need to see in yourself, and it's like, I guess a part of it is true, but a part of it I think can be really damaging. I think at a certain point you also need to accept the fact that not everything is your fault, and that because if you've been psychologically abused, you're constantly being told everything is your fault. So you do have to get to a place of accepting that not everything is your fault, and that there are some things that are on other people. And I don't know if I'm really wording this properly, but it's something that I do feel like sometimes when I listen to people who are sort of very into like doing the work and stuff, feel like sometimes they don't fully address the hurdles that come from somebody who's literally just been like psychologically manipulated their whole life, or for a large part of their life. And it's hard to know their own beliefs. It's hard to really know what to believe or what's real or not, because they've been lied to so much in their life. But one thing that they do talk about a lot when talking about inner work and spirituality and stuff is like the ego and the soul. I think that's really, really significant when it comes to narcissism. We all know what the ego is, right? When you're living in your ego, you get very defensive. Your ego doesn't necessarily always make the best decisions. When you're acting from your soul, you're acting from your true self, who you really are. Your ego's got all your stories, it's got all your defenses, all your, defense mechanisms. Your soul is like who you truly are. My observation with narcissism and people who have narcissistic personality disorder is a pathological addiction to being in their ego. Almost as if their ego is so strong they can't get out of it. Say for example, you have a person who writes a paper and they give it to someone to read, and the person's like, hey, there's a typo on page 3. A healthy person, well-adjusted person who is living from their soul will say, thank you very much for pointing that out, I'm going to change it. Now, something like that could activate somebody's ego, and we're all human, we all have an ego. So it could cause the person who wrote the paper to kind of be like, oh, or make excuses. Oh, I was really up late, and oh, I couldn't do this or whatever. Or they might get defensive, or they might start making excuses, or they might even get a little bit angry at this person for pointing out a flaw, or it might activate that like, I'm not good enough, and they have to start proving themselves, or they start going out and being like, oh, I have to write a whole new paper because I'm embarrassed. Like those are things that come from the ego. They're not necessarily healthy, so to speak, but they're human, they're natural, they happen. It's just a matter of, if you don't live in that place, if you can eventually then move through those feelings that your ego puts you through, of all of your wounding and your defense mechanisms and things like that, and you can move into the soul of like just being like, okay, thank you, and I'm just gonna do better because I'm human and this is what happens, right? And I think most people are capable, even if people do get stuck in their ego, most people are capable of kind of riding that wave to get back to the soul and their true self, right? If you're dealing with a narcissist, it's as if, and again, I'm not in their head, so I don't really know what's going on in their head, but what it feels like from the outside is somebody who is so stuck in their ego that they can't get out of it. And they will do anything and go to any measure to have their ego win, because getting out of their ego into their soul, they'll have to accept that they're human and that they make mistakes. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, they can't accept any kind of mistake or any kind of humanity, really. I mean, any kind of just, you know, human error. So something like dealing with a narcissist, if somebody was like, hey, the spelling error on page 3, they're gonna jump to anger, maybe. They're gonna jump to denial, just pretending it's not there, even when it clearly is. They're gonna jump to blaming every single person. And again, those are things that, like, you know, a healthy, well-adjusted individual may jump to that first, but they're able to kind of move through that and just say, hey, I'm human, I'm gonna fix this and move on. So that, to me, I think is really the defining characteristic as far as my experience of narcissism, is just like that you're in the ego and you can't move out of it. Like, it can't, because if you move out of the ego and you have to move into the fact that you're human and that you do make mistakes or admit that there might be a flaw, they can't do that, right? And they'll go to any measure possible to prove that they didn't mess up or they didn't make a mistake. And that's something I've been observing for a while. But another thing that I had picked up on recently, as far as masculine and feminine dynamics, I've noticed a pattern in some of my past interactions with narcissists who were males. Many of them are not in their masculine energy. Many of them are actually very much in feminine, often a wounded feminine energy. I have a lot more details about what that means in other videos, so I'm not going to get into too much of detail on what that means, but essentially they're not the masculine in the situation. Like, they're embodying the feminine in the situation, or they're embodying more of a wounded or sort of that maybe little boy energy, like they haven't fully grown into their king yet, but they have really deep shame around that. Like, so deep, because they want to be perceived as being in their masculine energy. They want to be perceived as being a leader, as being in that king-like role. That's what they want to be perceived, probably because they feel like they should be perceived that way. But they're not doing that. And you know, whether they're not capable of doing that, or whether they just don't know how to, or they just don't want to, that I don't know. I'm not actually in their head, but from my observation, it's that they have such a deep shame. They're not embodying that masculine leadership, that they then have to take it out on everybody else. Particularly take it out on somebody who is embodying the masculine, who is the leader in the situation, or manipulate the situation so that they look like they are even when they're not. And a story came to mind of an example of this from my life that I wanted to share, from a past relationship that I was in. And this was long before I was studying masculine and feminine energies, and really didn't understand a lot of this stuff. A little bit of backstory about the situation in this relationship. For one thing about me, I'm a really good problem solver. Like, an excellent problem solver. I actually just took a leadership quiz recently, and like my problem solving skills were like off the charts. They were like whatever, but it's not something that I pride myself on, because in the past, and in the example I'm about to give you, I tend to get either shamed for it, or it tends to not work out well for me. So it's actually something that I'm just learning now, as part of my healing from psychological abuse. It's something I'm just learning to embody right now. But problem solving skills and solving a problem and getting to a solution, that's a very masculine energy. I'm a very feminine core being, but my healthy masculine energy is problem solving. It's being very grounded and rooted and being able to solve a problem. I'm very good at doing that, and that is my masculine energy. I was in a relationship with a man who I believe was a narcissist in hindsight. We had this pattern in our relationship that just, oh my God, it happened so many times, right? Where we would be in a situation where it would just be a logistical thing. It wouldn't really be a big drama. It wouldn't be a big issue. It would just be like a logistical, like, we need to figure out how to get from point A to point B, or we need to figure out like how to fit in these things within a certain span of time, or just some kind of logistical thing that we needed to do as a couple. He would always get into this very like, I don't know how we're gonna handle this, I don't know what we're gonna do, this kind of thing, which is very feminine energy. That like emotion and the chaos, it's very feminine energy, and he would always embody that energy in that situation, right? Now, when one partner in a relationship starts to embody that feminine energy, very often the other partner then feels like they need to embody the masculine, right? Because that's polarity. It's That's just how it works, right? You need a masculine and a feminine in a relationship to really make polarity. So because he would do this, and I didn't really fully understand that this is what was going on at the time, but because he would do this, I would then step into my masculine, which was to solve the problem. So I would go into, okay, well, we just need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, he didn't like that. So he would then tell me all the reasons why my solution was wrong. They were never really good reasons, but they were reasons that he would make up. So I would let it go because I didn't want to make an argument, and because I had a little bit of people pleaser energy going on there for a while. Usually about a week later. It would take about a week for it to curdle. And he would come back to me and he would be like, hey, I have a solution to that problem we were trying to figure out. And I'd be like, oh, what is it? He'd be like, oh, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z. It would be my exact solution. So I know there's a lot of women's advice columns out there who would probably tell women that their answer to that should be, oh, honey, you're so smart. How did you even think of that? That's perfect. And just enjoy the fact that things were gonna get done your way, right? I'm not built like that, right? And it was never for me about being right or needing to be better than him, or I don't like to be in competition with the person I'm in a relationship with at all. It was never about that for me. But to be honest, I mean, some of it was my own ego stepping in and being like, hey, like, hello. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what it really was is, for one, I wanted credit for my work, you know? I mean, it's like, what are you doing? You're just plagiarizing my idea. What are you, Joe Biden? No, I don't even know. I'm not gonna make this political, never mind. So yeah, a part of me wanted credit for my work. That was my ego. But also I wanted appreciation. I wanted to feel appreciated in that situation. And this felt very, I felt very unappreciated. Like I wasn't pulling my own weight, which was an issue that I have had going through my life, which was something I needed to work on. But then when I would say to him, you know, like, hey, that was my idea. That's the idea I told you a week ago. What he would do was he would just deny that it was even my idea. And he knew that it was my idea. He remembered. I remembered. But he would just deny it. It would be complete denial, which is where it starts to get into the psychological abuse. That's where narcissism tends to flip into. And it's just one example, but it's an example of, you know, because the narcissist can't accept that they didn't come up with the idea, or that would imply that somebody else did something better than them, they then just had to deny it. It was just like, it didn't exist, it didn't happen. It's a very defining characteristic of narcissism. Because if someone tells you over and over and over again that something didn't happen, eventually you start to think, oh my God, did that actually even happen? Did I even remember that? Like, that messes with your head big time. And that's just one example. I mean, there's tons of examples of different ways that psychological abuse can come up in relationships. But it was just an observation that I had when it came to masculine and feminine dynamics of this pattern. And I've noticed in other relationships, that was one example of one situation that I noticed, that it was like this in a male who couldn't step into that masculine energy, that healthy masculine energy. And again, I don't really know why, if it's because he didn't know how, because he couldn't, but he held that shame in there. So when his partner, in my case as a female, would step into that, because honestly, in some cases, sometimes feminine beings are just better at stepping into their masculine energy than masculine beings, because they just, I mean, we do have a society where we have trained women to be in their masculine more often. I mean, I think for some men, for a lot of men, hopefully, they take that as a challenge. They're like, hey, if she's stepping up and she can handle masculine energy, well, then I'm gonna step it up and I'm gonna embody my inner masculine. Masculine, I think in general, is more competitive. So it's like, if they're like, well, no, I need to step it up. So I don't necessarily think it's about, like, I would never tell women to not fully step into, like, if you're good at something, and I'm good at problem solving, but I learned to not problem solve because it was always a problem, because I always was resented for it. And it's just like, well, I'm good at it. And I have to admit, I do think, I didn't understand it at the time, but I do think that was a part of me that kind of resented him a little bit. I mean, I wasn't conscious of it at the time, but resented him a little bit for not being the one that stepped into that role of problem solving. But I don't think the solution was necessarily for me to not solve the problem because it needed to get solved and I was just better at it. And I think for a lot of men, I think especially ones who are like, you know, a healthy masculine energy and have a healthy relationship with their ego, they then take that opportunity, and they may be hurt, their egos might be hurt, they may go through stuff, but they can like, they use that opportunity to like step up their masculine, like, okay, well, I just got to get stronger in this area. But I think a lot of times with narcissism, it becomes more of a, they need to tear down the other person as opposed to using that as an opportunity for them to step up. Again, I don't know why they're not stepping up, and I'm sure there's probably various reasons. In some cases, they don't know how to. Maybe they're just not confident enough in themselves. Maybe they just don't want to. I mean, there's a million different reasons, but these are just some observations, and I know this is a lot of rambling, but it was just some observations that I had noticed. I'm not saying at all that this is like the definitive answer in narcissism. I'm just saying these are just things that I've experienced personally in my healing journey. Because I do know when I tend to talk about the subject of narcissism and dealing with psychological abuse, I do know a lot of people have messaged me and told me that they got something out of it and it was helpful to them. So I'm just really hoping that this was helpful to some of you. I'm somebody who likes to understand things, and I like to understand how people think and the whys of things and stuff like that. At the end of this, if you take anything from this, it's for one, if you do think that you are possibly in a situation where you're being psychologically abused or with a narcissist, then please get help. Please do your research. There's a lot of outlets out there now. It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to go through, and it's a difficult thing to deal with. Educating yourself, I believe, has been very helpful in my recovery process. I think it's relearning, something that I've had to relearn, is to not dim yourself so that other people can shine. It's you need to shine, and then other people can decide if they wanna. If other people wanna try to outshine you, then let them try. You know what I mean? Like let them try. I mean, we can all shine, you know. And because I do think that is very common when it comes to dealing with psychological abuse, is people start downplaying and they don't see their strengths because they're always told that their strengths are a problem. And again, I mean, this is rooted in probably every insecurity that I've ever had, was this kind of idea of like every time I did shine or I did do something well, it was always torn down because it was a problem. Like I was then making somebody else look bad, and which was never my intention. I mean, I'm not somebody who likes to make other people look bad. I don't like to make other people feel bad. I'm not naturally a competitive person at all. So that's just something I've been working through, and it's an observation I made. And if this was helpful to any of you, then it was worth making the video. If you guys have any, you know, thoughts or anything, or, you know, want me to do more videos on this topic or anything like that, please let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up. All my social media channels have been linked in the description box below. I'm very active on Instagram, so you can follow me there. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.